Paul Dorney. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Mateo, how's it going? Thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting to you.
It's an honor, Paul. It's an honor. Paul, we're going to talk today about building technology products and the leadership that it takes, and your story. And to do that, I want to start from today. And I want to ask, what do you do today for a living?
Yeah, so right now I am the CTO of Bosscat, and we are a company based in the US. And what we do is we're revolutionizing the home repair, renovations, and repair space. So basically, if you think of it, it's quite an analog industry where you get some PDF documentation, and it's kind of very much like, hey, what do I need to do with this? What we do is we kind of demystify it. We take that information, we extract it, we run it through our matching algorithms with pricing, etc. And we give homeowners this real peace of mind where they can see, hey, this is exactly what I need to get done, how much it's going to cost. And if you're in one of our serviceable areas, we can then connect you to our qualified, vetted network of pros who can go out and complete the work. That's kind of like our toes in the water, with long-term us being kind of your centralized hub. Think of it like your operating system for your home, where you can come into Bosscat and you'll be able to manage all aspects of your home. And, we're going to have a lot of cool future offerings coming down the space, but we're very much kind of at the start where we become that home operating system.
Very nice. So you really become a partner or a sidekick for the homeowner.
Yeah, exactly. Our whole thing is to make home ownership was it like less stressful. It's a lot of times it's going to be the largest outlay anyone has in their lifetime, and we want to bring peace of mind to that. So trying to be that easy button, whether it's hey, I need something small done, oh, I want to inquire about getting a big project done. And a lot of times, if you've got a big project that requires multiple different qualified folks, how do you find those folks? You're chasing them down on phone calls, it's different scheduling, and people are busy. So what we're trying to do is give people back that peace of mind and also time. So, to save them time, money, etc., like that, so that you can kind of concentrate on other aspects. So rather than the kind of becoming like a scheduling assistant for different pros and making sure that everything times up, etc., like that.
Right. Very good. Paul, how long have you been in this role as a CTO of Bosscat?
Yes, so I joined Bosscat February 2021. So just over 2.5 years now. So it's gone through a massive change in my last 2.5 years. Our CEO and founder Min had come in and kind of really revolutionized the company and kind of changed the direction and really put kind of rocket fuel into the engine. So we've gone from, when I came on, like just around 20 people to over 100 people. We've kind of gone with national partnerships. Our revenues have obviously exploded. We raised a Series A last year at, I think it was 39 million, so one of the largest in the southeast. So really, really cool progress, and a testament to the work of all the folks that were here and had built the company up, and then all the folks that have come in and kind of taken us to the next level. So it's really exciting times.
Wow. Paul, is this your first role as a CTO?
No, I had founded my own company in 2016 called Silbo, in a different market, but still in the gig economy space. So with Silbo, it was to do with, and excuse the thing, but everyone at the time was the Uber of, the same way back in the day everyone was the eBay or Amazon of, but we were the Uber of sports officiating. So what we wanted to do was similarly connect games and leagues to qualified vetted sports officials. And I was the founder there, but we can get into it later. I think, in a smaller company, everyone could be called the Queen of Sheba, basically. But I was leading up the technology on that side, so kind of refrain myself from calling myself the CTO at that stage, because it's 4 dudes in a basement. But yeah, I led the technology and product on that side, and eventually operations.
How did you came up with, was it you as a sole founder? Did you have a group of co-founders? And how did you came up with the idea?
Yeah, so 2 of my buddies had the idea. So one of them has background in professional sports and had been a coach and had kind of spotted a gap in the system. So, back when Uber came out, the big thing was, hey, you have this centralized location of a dispatcher. And also it's kind of like this central choke point that actually it's the middle person, basically. And we noticed that in the actual youth sports space, there was an exact same situation where you would go into a local area, and whether you're a new official or existing official, there were these centralized agents called assigners that determined what games you got, how many you got, where you went to work. So what we tried to do was democratize that and bring out a platform that allowed leagues and officials to connect, kind of not so much cutting out the middle person, the assigner, because they do have a very important role, but it was more to make it easier. So, if you went into an area, a new area, and you were an official, or a lot of officials kind of travel with their normal jobs and they might pick up work. We were talking about youth sports games from like 6-year-olds up to 14-year-olds. And we didn't really we wanted to kind of handle that kind of vast majority of games that don't impact scholarships as much and stuff like that. But with us, we saw a gap in the market, and two of my friends had come up with it, and they'd done a lot of research, and then they came to me with it. And I'm not from the States, so when I heard about it, I was like, oh, that sounds like super, super small. But then if you forget how big America is, right? So it turned out it was like $1 billion industry and stuff like that. So we dived in there, and a lot of good learnings. We ran that for about 4 years before we exited, but definitely, what is it? You learn more after the fact than during it. So got to experience a lot of really cool things, from kind of, on a whiteboard, bringing a product to market, getting customers. We signed deals with major sports organizations. We were in talks with the Big Ten to take over all their event staff before we exited. So really got really cool exposure. Got to go visit the NBA offices a bunch of times, stuff like that. So it's pretty cool experience.
How did you build a team when you were building Silver, right? You needed to get the right people on the bus. How did you choose the right people? What type of people were you looking for?
Yes, so when we were there, we were very lucky with the mentors we had. So we had some really really experienced, kind of like been there, done it all, seen it all at like the highest levels, public CEOs, stuff like that. So they really helped us refine it, because we were, as I said, we were a few fellas in a basement basically, and we were trying to attract talent. It was up in the Triangle area too, so there was a lot of startups coming up in the Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill area at the same time, and there's some really good schools there, Duke, UNC, and NC State. So the good thing is we had an available pool of talent in that area. The difficulty was obviously finding talent for our budget, basically. I think of it, and again, use the bad sports analogy, like it's easy for Manchester United to go by whoever they want, but if you're like, a non-league, League One, if anyone's watching the Wrexham documentary, without their money, and you're trying to compete for those people. So what we had to do was kind of think a little bit outside the box. So we didn't really get to go after extremely experienced folks initially. What we did is we tried to identify talent that had kind of, it's hard to, It's hard to screen for grit. That's basically the best way to put it, right? There's that great Angela Duckworth book, Grit. But to screen for grit, we couldn't really do that. Now, we were in sports tech, so excuse the bad analogies, but the way it had been kind of described to us, and one of our mentors had built all of the Red Hat team in the same area. And he was always talking about, like, you're always recruiting. As a founder, as a leader, you should always be recruiting, whether it's getting coffee down the local Starbucks, you're at Target, spot talent where you might not think to see it. So for us, we identified folks that had played either a college sport or high school sport that wasn't one of like the fancy sports, basically, it wasn't basketball, football, and stuff like that. We primarily were looking like wrestling, rowing, stuff like that. We were trying to like identify some talent with folks that they might not necessarily have known exactly what they wanted to work in. So I'm not just talking about technology recruitment here, because we were all hands on deck recruiting for sales, operations, marketing, everything like that. And what we wanted to do is try and identify folks that, when it sucks, they'll be okay to say, cool, let's keep going, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what we did. Is we went to a lot of the school fairs. We talked to a lot of different startups in the area, especially folks that might have been struggling, or they might have identified talent and, hey, we went another way. So we definitely like used a lot of our networks in the area to connect with different folks. And also we built really good relationships with NC State in order to get access to some of the talented folks coming out. Because now we were competing with some of the big players in the space. So totally understand a lot of folks we went for, especially on the technology side, picked, the more, the more secure kind of
Right.
roles with larger companies, which I get, but we were still able to identify really, really good talent. And one of the coolest things from Syllable is seeing the folks that had worked with us go on and thrive in their careers. And so you see them kind of climbing the ranks now with other larger companies and stuff like that. So it was kind of really cool. The way I think of it as like almost like an academy system in sports. It's like they came in, I think everyone says afterwards that it was a really cool, unique experience at the time. Because at our largest, we only ever really got up to 25, 30 people. So it was really cool experience, really tight knit team that kind of all pulled together in one direction.
Do you stay in touch with some of those people that succeeded afterwards? And
Yeah, I'm still in touch with most of them. Like I met them all about 2 months ago back up in Raleigh. A bunch of us all got together and stuff like that. We're still kind of constantly in touch because if you're dealing with phone calls from referees at like 1 a.m. on a Saturday night all together, you kind of build a lifelong bond, I think. As we joke, it's like herding cats, right? Like 20% of the folks love it. They're just reliable. They do it for the love of the game. 80% of folks do it. It is a paycheck and life happens because it's not a main gig, it's a side gig. So you're getting to deal with a lot of folks that, interesting characters is the best way I'd put it. And you're in that situation yourselves together.
yeah, what was the hardest part of building Silvo and then succeeding? Was it finding the talent? Was it running operations and Saturdays 1 a.m.? What was the hardest thing about it?
Yeah, I think the hardest thing for us was, all the stuff that we didn't know. At the time you think like, hey, we'll build a product, people will come use it, it'll be all magic. But I kind of touched on the assigner situation. In retrospect, probably we came at it, wide-eyed, hey, we can change the industry type of thing. We did make it a little harder on ourselves in that aspect. We came in and to displace initially. We ended up changing and pivoting a little bit, but we came in to displace. Whereas I think if we had approached it through the assigners, it could have become a lot easier because the big thing for us was fulfillment. And I suppose the best way to put it is if we sign leagues in like rural areas. Now, the reason they're coming to us is because, hey, they might traditionally not have been able to find officials. And, like a startup, you're like, hey, we're going to figure it out. But there's a reason they're coming to us, if that makes sense. It's an area that doesn't have a lot of officials. Now, we did get into the training, the mentorship, all of that stuff, but we weren't able to print officials to come off the conveyor belt and send them to games. So I think for us, the hardest part was always the scaling fulfillment part, which we managed to get down really, really good. We had a lot of help. One of our advisors had built up Uber. He had gone into Uber Atlanta and built Uber Atlanta. We had followed their playbook and stuff like that. But I think that was the challenge. It was fun, but also it was definitely the most challenging is I don't have an operational background, basically, or running operations and stuff like that. I ended up taking over that part of the company initially. So like scaling, launching in areas, had really good folks on the team that worked in it. But if you think of it, we also worked through COVID. So we had signed some of the largest tournaments in the States at the time because with COVID, a lot of games were canceled across the country. But out west in Colorado and Arizona, they were still going on. So we were launching those areas from basically a room back in North Carolina, with a place where we didn't have officials, we didn't have things. So those some really cool challenges, a lot of lessons learned and stuff like that. But those I'd say would be the hardest part is making sure when the going gets tough, the team were able to band together and go forward. And a bit of a shout out to one of our mentors when we were doing all that. He had sent me the book on Shackleton, the endurance book, and he told me hey, read that and you'll get it. And I remember reading that and I was like, yeah, that's kind of what we need, as in, hey, we know we need to get rescued, we know we need to get out of here. No one actually knows exactly where to go, but you've got to have that faith and confidence in yourself and say, hey, if we just do this, we'll be fine. And in fairness, and we ended up doing it. So for a bit of kind of context, I might have some of the numbers wrong if anyone is running tournaments, but let's say there was usually 250 to 400 games max at a super, super large tournament. We were taking tournaments on 2 or 3 weeks notice with 1,200 games, stuff like that. So it was very much stretching our capacity, but at the time, needs must, right? So it was kind of hey, we've got to get this done. And in fairness to the folks working the games and the team and everything like that, we managed to pull it off. So it was really cool. It showed like, hey, we could put on the elbow grease and kind of get it done. But in hindsight, it's probably a case of, hey, we should have probably built up a little bit smaller, or I suppose during COVID realized like, hey, there's going to be some other challenges that we don't anticipate.
When you had those challenges and those big tournaments and you needed to get the officials, where were those coming from? Was it mostly inbound, or it was mostly outbound and you were sourcing for the officials and looking at, Googling up like, okay, lacrosse officials in Colorado, I'm going to call you, hey, you want to sign up in my, Spirit Easy, you only have to do blah, blah, blah. How did that work?
Yeah, so there's no real kind of like database or kind of central repository of all officials that you can connect to. So a lot of us was our sales team hitting the ground and kind of connecting with those local assigners or folks that have done tournaments before and getting access to different folks and then running marketing campaigns. We obviously had sent someone over like there about 6 months before COVID when we were kind of talking through the league, and they had made some connections, and a lot of it was marketing, a lot of it was referrals. Hey, so folks realized one of the cool things with us was it was work where you want, when you want, how often you want. So no one was going to be told to do the games. We also paid once a week, which was pretty it was not as common in the sports officiating space. So every Friday, if you had completed your games by Tuesday 6 p.m., it was in your bank account on Friday, which is a really cool turnaround for officials, because sometimes they might not get paid till the end of the season, or they'll get paid in lump sums. So for us, we became that like super reliable kind of, you were your own boss, and then word of mouth spread and stuff like that. So we had, for the big large tournaments, we did rely on like connecting with those, what we'd call like top tier officials. They would bring folks along, they knew folks, so we really leveraged our network basically, and we had a lot of referral programs and stuff like that. So it was definitely we were definitely coming up with new initiatives each time to make sure that we hit it, stuff like that.
And you played rugby back in Ireland?
Yeah. Growing up, I played rugby. That was primarily what I played in what you'd call high school and college, and soccer as well, obviously soccer. And then I played a few Irish sports when I was super young, so hurling and Gaelic football as well when I was super young, which are super interesting. We did try and break into the Irish hockey or field hockey market at one stage. It just didn't end up working out. But that would have been an interesting one as well. Again, super small market compared to the States, but that would have been cool. But I think the funnest one we talked to is there's a professional Quidditch league, from Harry Potter.
What?
Yeah, they play in the UK. I think they should. I think they have a website. I remember it was cool. But I think they play in the summertime in like Championship and League One stadiums. So they play in like legit stuff. And basically, it would have been a plug and play. They already have all their officials. They just wanted to use the platform and stuff like that. But that was one of the ones we were talking to right during the end. So it's super. It's funny. We had built the system, and the way you think of products is like when we started, we were kind of concentrating. Hey, my friends' backgrounds are in baseball, and we were like, hey, we can get all of these leagues in this local area. The contracts are coming up, stuff like that. When it came to me to build it, I was thinking a little broader, because I was thinking like, hey, there's certain specific stuff that's needed for baseball, but in my mind is like, we need to make the platform agnostic, because you can't at the end of the day, as I joked, if you wanted to invent, I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Basketball, if you wanted to invent your own sport and needed officials, you could use us. It didn't matter. Basically, our platform was agnostic, and that worked out for us in the end, because folks were able to leverage the platform to use it for different things like event staff, hot dog vendors, stuff like that. We became basically folks at a sporting event that needed the scheduling, checking in, getting paid and stuff like that. So it worked out really well for us, where we kind of approached it as this broad aspect that, hey, you have an event that needs folks there. You can use this as a way to onboard them, vet them, make sure they arrive on time, schedule them, and get them paid, basically.
And when you finally exited, when you got to that kind of final stage that kind of everyone in a startup, it's in their minds, that's kind of the end goal, right? How did that feel? Was that something that you were looking for at that particular time? Was it more of a surprise? And How did that feel at the moment and afterwards?
Yeah, so for us, it was basically we were on the fundraising trail. We'd raised a bunch of venture funding already, and it was going to the next stage. But with COVID, our numbers were definitely impacted. So we knew, exactly what numbers we needed to hit to get back in the door to get that next round of funding. And we were in like 14 different markets and stuff like that. Um, at the time, actually, we had just gotten a really cool partnership with one of the largest platforms in the States to be kind of their officiating add-on, basically. So it would have gotten us access to way, way more games. And we were kind of in final discussions with ESPN and stuff like that to take over their Florida market. So we had a lot of cool things cooking. However, it came to the stage where our current investors would have to reinvest and get us to X amount, to bridge us, which they had agreed to do, which was totally fine. However, at that time, we have to kind of make an honest decision is that like, hey, look, can we in good conscience, because, it's when you're in a startup, it's easy like, hey, we just need to raise these funds and we'll figure out. But we have to make that conscious decision of, hey, will it really get us to that next stage of growth that we need? Because we had a bunch of inbound interest for the platform itself, basically. And we got to that stage where we realized that the actual fiscally responsible thing to everyone was to take the offer. So that's kind of where we ended up exiting. And I suppose after 4 years, I think we were probably ready to see the end of sports officials as well for a little bit. But yeah, that was kind of with us. It was a cool experience to go through the exit because to due diligence and stuff like that. So that was another kind of really cool experience. But it wasn't I think one of the misnomers in startups, if anyone's listened to this, that kind of is thinking of getting into them or has only ever heard of like the Instagram success, 18 months, boom, this giant exit. That's not the norm. That's that's the Patriots coming back against the Falcons in the Super Bowl events. Usually it's these smaller events that happen and then lead to something else, or stuff peters out. So, but for us, if you had given me that experience at the start and said, hey, you'd end up here, I would have definitely taken it because we learned a ton. We got that experience. We went through that exit. We decided not to stick. We decided to go our own ways, stuff like that. But it was a really cool experience.
And it was a success, right? Like you said, the Instagram moment, it's an exception, but also being successful and being able to sell it, it's also an exception. I would say the norm is that fail. Failure is the most normal way to get out of.
And there's a lot of learnings from failure. We definitely failed a load. But yeah, we return money to our investors, so that's considered a success. Yeah. So yeah, we'll take that. I'll take that. No problem.
And Paul, you are a software developer, a software engineer. You grew up in Ireland. You were born in Ireland and you grew up in Ireland, and then you came to the US. Can you tell me a little bit about that? How that opportunity came about and what was it like to come to the US from Ireland?
Yeah, so I grew up in Cork, Ireland. It's very important because we're from Cork first. Anyone Irish will roll their eyes at that. But yeah, I grew up in Cork and then I joined Fidelity Investments. So interesting thing, they were doing a graduate program where they would take 25 people each year, train them in Fidelity's ways for 12 months. You would do like a 3-month, and 6-month kind of projects. And at the completion of your 12 months, you would be sent over to a business unit in the States. I ended up working in Merrimack, New Hampshire. I was commuting from Boston, but so I lived in Boston, worked in Merrimack on the market data team. So super interesting. I didn't know my head from my elbow basically, but was really cool. We were working on the market data. So, when you go onto fidelity.com, all that information that flows in, the market data team manage those flows. So basically pulling the information from Comstock and the other feeds. So went there, worked there for a few years, and then I moved downtown Boston. I was working more on the consumer experience side. So if you went to fidelity.com and you were looking to get insurance and stuff like that, the team there was really fun team, really kind of like cutting edge on the front end side of technology. Working with them, that was really cool. But then I had an inkling where I wanted to build enterprise level technology, and an opportunity came to join SAS, who are they're based in North Carolina. They had just bought a startup up in Boston. I joined the the entity up in Boston, basically just after they'd completed their purchase. So looking back on it, when I didn't know anything really about startups, it was really cool experience, because that was a small team that had just actually recently exited to the larger company. So it still had that same startup mindset, which was really cool, because I was there for like a year before I relocated to North Carolina. And working there, I was able to work under like an extremely, like, exceptionally talented manager and developer, Jared. Shout out to Jared, who's climbing the ranks at SaaS at the moment. He took over a project called SaaS Contextual Analysis, and that was like this huge project where it was taking the technology that the startup from Boston had created, bringing it into SaaS's platform. So it was really cool to be able to see from whiteboard to product launch kind of all that goes into it at that gigantic, $1 billion company. And it was really cool because it went from basically whiteboard to first sale. I think it was 18 months, but it was on track, on budget. It made it was a smashing success. I believe they're on like their second or third version of it at this stage, but it's used by, the largest companies in the world basically use it on a daily basis. So really, really cool experience. And probably one of the reasons I went and did Silbo is I saw that get created and built. And because I'm a little crazy, I was like, I wonder, could I do that without the safety nets, without the big team, without the big marketing push, without all that. So that's why when my friend had this, they had this idea for Silbo, and we met up and we were chatting about it. And in my head, I was like, why not? Like, I was like, hey, one of the things that we probably didn't do, and I always think is, succeed or die as fast as you can. So that way, we can move on. So that's the way we thought about it. We managed to succeed and get more contracts and do stuff. So it ended up going on for a little longer than I kind of anticipated. Oh, sorry, I think it stalled there for a second.
Anticipated? Longer than you anticipated?
Yeah, as in like when we first started, we were kind of laughing, thinking, all right, if we build this, we'll get this contract and stuff like that, and we'll see how it goes, and then we'll bring it to the VCs, and we'll see how it happens. So we built like an MVP, presented that, but in fairness, some of my founders were are really, really good sales folks, and they had secured a bunch of contracts before we had the product fully fleshed out, let's just say. So we had some crazy deadlines to hit in order. It was like, hey, games happen at this date. It needs to work. We need to have folks on it. So we ended up hitting all our timelines. So it ended up okay, but yeah, it was definitely what is it? The joke on startups is you jump off a cliff and you're building the plane on the way down. We very much were doing that. That was definitely us. But we were with a lot of late nights and probably shouting at each other. We managed to get it all done.
It's a good analogy. And I want to go back a little bit to, so you were in your mid-20s, you came to the US, you went to Boston. Boston is like, at least from the ignorant point of view, it's like, okay, it's the most Irish place you can go to in the US, right? Did it feel like that? How did it feel to land in Boston? And how was that part of your life in your mid-20s, like working for huge US companies, making it, how did that go?
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, there definitely was a ton of Irish people. The really cool thing too, we were year 4 or 5 of the program, so there was a giant community when you landed of Fidelity employees. In the same area. We joke like there must have been like an invisible bell because we all ended up living around the Somerville area. But it was really cool because you had a lot of support. Everyone worked kind of at least started at that company, and then they've all branched off or stayed in Fidelity and like are super, super high up now and stuff like that. But you had that community feel. And obviously, as you said, mid-20s, the stereotypes of Irish people are true. So we definitely had a lot of fun. But it was really cool. You got to learn a lot of different stuff, got to see, got really good exposure to different parts of the business. And then you have a bunch of folks that are working across the organization. So you kind of got to see or hear how different teams work, what's working well, what type of projects people were working on. So it was super, super cool.
Very nice. Paul, you worked at Fidelity, you worked at SAS, you built your company at Silu, and now you are the CTO of Bosscat. You have a lot of experience, but I want to ask, what does it really mean to be a CTO? In your description, how would you describe what being a CTO means?
Yeah, I think I'm still learning it myself, to be honest with you. And basically that's where I just like leverage like learnings, talking to folks and stuff like that. For me, it's that thing, it's just providing that guidance. You know, you're going to be working with folks that are infinitely smarter, more up to date, probably on different new technologies and stuff like that. Because life happens, you're dealing with different stuff. There's always someone who's a lot smarter than you. The key is providing that guidance and that calming kind of influence, while anyone who's probably working probably listens to this and laughs, whatever. But internally towards technology, you know yourself, working with technology folks, highly intelligent, and I don't think I know many developers who like to think that they're wrong, basically. So the key is being like a mediator, a calming voice. You know, take a deep breath, we'll get somewhere. And, you know, the bad analogy I always use is the way I approach, there's all different types of developers, right? There's the folks, and I'm a movie nerd, so I'll use the bad analogy, The Martian. So I don't know if you know the movie The Martian, or the book
Yeah.
The Martian. Basically, I love that book. But basically, you know, you're on a planet and you need to get off. And the way I say it is, there's a bunch of developers who think like, all right, what are we going to do in the upper atmosphere when we're getting up there, you know? And they're thinking of that. And then there's other folks who are like, hey, we need to survive another day so that we can get to that. Whereas I see myself as that, hey, let's take the first step. I learned that from my SAS mentor. It's take that first step, you know, hey, how do we get there? And I think that at the technology level, I think there's different flavors of CTOs or technical leaders at companies. You know, some of them are very much the, hey, I'm up in the clouds. What about we do this? What about we do that? Which, don't get me wrong, can definitely do that all day, every day. However, I have checked myself and made sure I'm more of the temperate, like, hey, this is where we need to go. How do we work back from there? Let's take the steps. And then the key is being collaborative and, you know, listening to everyone. But at the end of the day, it's your call. So you have to be sure that, you know, have all of the information, you're providing the guidance, and you're making your team feel bought into that decision, if that makes sense. So for me, being the CTO is that it's making sure everyone feels heard, but also bringing your super end of the process folks and your, hey, how do we start the first step, and anyone in between, bringing them all together into that unified vision of, hey, this is where we need to go. And especially at a startup like us, we're growing very fast, but everyone wants, hey, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? How do we do this? Sometimes you can forget, hey, we've done this, and this, and those were important building blocks to get there. To use the house analogy, because we're with Bosscat, is, you know, there's no point in talking about the chimney, the color of the chimney, until you have the foundation in place, and then you have the walls. And like, it's totally fine to talk about it, but you can't be expecting it to go on next week and stuff like that. So my role as well is to help her temper expectations in other departments, because, you know, stuff takes time, right? Like, you know, it takes time for concrete to set. It takes time to restack a technology. It takes time to do stuff. So a lot of times people speak out what's needed and they expect it to have happened, but it's like, hey, we have these 9 other things in flight. These 4 are very important for the issue you're talking about. So my job is to translate that in a concise manner that can be understood by everyone, I think, as well. That's kind of important.
I like it. I was talking to a CTO the other day, and what he told me is that when he's setting up objectives for the team, he likes giving that guidance and he likes showing the North Star, but he also likes to keep it simple. He says, I will show them a 90 days roadmap and not longer. Why?
Yeah.
Because it typically can change, and because then we lose focus on what we need to achieve today, right? So when you were talking about take that first step and focus on that, you know, build the foundations and do what is needed to be done today to survive. I've heard that a few other times from leaders I admire. You are one of the leaders I admire, and so yeah, I see the point there. I definitely do.
That's a really good one. As he said, like after 90, like stuff changes, and invariably everything changes in business, obviously. But I think for non-developers, it can it can be hard to understand that if you're constantly changing initiatives for developers, then they don't get bought into the here and now because they just think, oh, it's going to change anyway. So that's why it's really important to be, because again, it's a different mindset. You're not talking about salespeople, you're not talking about marketing people, you're talking about very ordinary, like, you're talking about a different kettle of fish, basically, when it comes to certain types of developers who are very, they're not a bed of roses to deal with, basically. Like, that's the bottom line. Is like, developers are quite divas, for better intensive words. They all think that they're right. So yeah, that's one of the things you got to be, and I'm guilty of that myself. So you gotta be careful.
What do you look for in developers when you're building a team? What do you talked about grit earlier today? Is that something you still look for in developers when you're hiring? What matters most?
For me, it's humility. So it's really important. So we got luckily we don't have any of that on our team, or in most of the teams I've ever worked on, this hasn't been the case, but there is a tendency for folks to be quite precious about their code and don't change that. This is what I've been working on and stuff like that. With us, what I look for is flexibility, ability to collaborate, and humility. So like, hey, you're going to learn every day. We all do. Like, technology changes. There's new things that come out with every update. It's a matter of staying on top of them, or someone on your team will have learned something new, and they're going to show you, not getting defensive and stuff. So it is very much that humility and like, hey, take in other people's ideas. No one owns the code. The company owns the code. And the key is, how do we make it better, basically? And that's kind of what I look for. And when I'm interviewing or when I'm trying to find folks, is very much trying to identify that. And it's hard. It's not a science, it's a lot of times it's a gut thing, or you're talking to someone and you hear something, but it's trying to identify folks that can work in a collaborative environment. They're easy to work with, good communication skills. Now, they're developers, so it's not like their communication skills are going to be that of a sales leader, but in their realm, basically, of, hey, can this person work with other people on the team? And at the end of the day, you spend so much time with the people you work with. Like, if you don't enjoy who you work with, what's the point of coming into work? That's the thing. Like, you spend the majority of your time there. And again, unlike, like, say, like family or thing, you pick where you work a lot of times. If you're lucky enough, you have options and stuff like that. But it's important that you get on with your teammates. And that, for me, is really important when I'm trying to hire folks, because once people have the skills and stuff like that, especially when you're trying to hire for senior positions, they have the skills. It's a matter of, can they communicate? Can they collaborate? And for me as well, a big one is, can you stick to your word and hit your deadlines, which, again, in the interview process, very hard. So that's more of, again, some of that personality stuff that we look into.
Would that be part of your advice if you were talking to younger developers that want to grow? You talked a lot, you talked about humility, flexibility, the ability to collaborate, communication skills, also, getting on with the team, that, just hitting some sort of cultural fit with the team, and also being able to hit deadlines and own deadlines, right? That ownership and that, ability to deliver. Would that also turn into what you would advise to younger developers? Like, hey, if you want to succeed, focus on this, and not so much on the perfection of the code. And, like you said, the company owns the code, so focus more on the other stuff.
Yeah, kind of like, once you get your skills up, like, it's important to deliver really clean code, tested, making, like, my whole thing, and I've said it before, people are sick of it, is like, discipline equals freedom in a lot of things in your life, right? And especially at work, like, it's like, if you're disciplined in your coding, right, and you deliver top, like, very high level code. Now, look, bugs will happen, but if you get a reputation for delivering buggy code, then suddenly everyone has to be on you. You have to be micromanaged. You have to that. So if you're disciplined, you deliver really good code, but also you're disciplined in the fact that you give concise updates. You make sure your teams are aware. Because again, I think what younger developers forget is, like, other people are busy and people have lives. It's very important to communicate in not in a, hey, this is what I'm looking for, but it's like a, hey, I'm working on this, you know, like especially in your daily stand-ups, you know, sometimes people can be frustrated and they'll say like one or two curt words, and it's like, you know, like I'm working on this. It's like, hey, I'm working on this, I'm getting close to it. Just little stuff like that. That's what I communicate to developers is no matter how good your like hard skills are, encouraging that, again, soft skills. You don't have to be the most loquacious person in the world, but you know, being able to communicate with folks and being nice to, like, again, my whole thing is like ask as many questions as you want. Like, I think it's way, I love asking questions. I'm wrong 100% of the time. My advice to them as well is don't worry about feeling that you look silly, because no one knows everything. So I think sometimes developers can spend days looking at stuff because they're afraid of asking and being like, oh, I should have known that. No, ask the question. Like, ask the question, build those relationships, because at the end of the day, that's what life is. It's just relationships. So if they can, you know, continue to build relationships, you know, people on your team will be willing to, like, not that they're not willing to help you, but they'll be more willing to jump in even when they're in a tough deadline and stuff like that. So that's what I would say to junior developers is making sure basically you're not like a smart ass and, you know, you work well with folks and stuff like that.
Discipline equals freedom. I'm going to write that down and put it somewhere near in my desk. I
Oh yeah.
absolutely love it. I absolutely love it.
I
And then
I robbed that from Jocko Willink. So he's got a really good book, Extreme Ownership. I highly recommend.
okay,
But it kind of talks to everything, you know, like let's say, like again, use things like, let's say you're more disciplined on your diet, then you have more freedom because you probably have to work out less. You know, not that shouldn't work out, but you know what I mean? Like little
yeah,
stuff like that. Everything, like the more you disciplined you are, like with your, and I'm bad at that, is your sleep time. You know, you get up easier. It's easier, like then you have more time in your day, you're on top of yourself. And he talks about communication, especially like, you know, depending on what your manager is or your reports, you know, if you're disciplined and you provide all the updates or get all the updates you require, you'll get more freedom. So, like, you know, if you have a manager who's asking you for updates every 2 days, if you give them an update in the morning every day, they're not going to be on to you. And eventually they'll be concentrating on the folks they're not hearing from. So they're like, oh, Mary knows exactly what she's doing. She's on it and stuff. And no, I'm guilty of that myself. I need to be better at that myself at times, but you know, everything's an up and down. But if you can provide concise update, if you're disciplined in your actions, you'll have more freedom at work and stuff like that, I think.
and sometimes that's just maybe a video in the ticket, a comment in the ticket, and just keeping up your tickets up to date in Jira. As simple as that.
But yeah, that it can be as simple as that, as in like, hey, if you haven't had an update for a few days, you know, just add something in like, hey, still working on this stuff, like super simple stuff that can really kind of like, and again, what people forget when you get into leadership roles, like no one wants to be chasing down updates. You know, that's the
Yeah,
other part. No one
yeah.
wants to chase updates, and that's the part people don't realize is, hey, like let's say you're managing 12 people. Do you want to chase down 12 people? No, you don't. So like if you're an individual contributor, you can think like, oh, they know what I'm working on. No, most of the time they don't. Like you have to kind of keep people updated, and again, celebrate your own victories. And by celebrating those, you know, that's important too, so that you keep track of it. And then try and think for other junior developers. One thing I would say too is like kind of on that tracking your achievements. Something I used to do is basically at the end of each month talk about or keep track of the stories that I completed, the features I completed, if it was on time, off time. I've done a bad job of that as I got older, but when I was younger, I definitely did that because, you know, at the end of your year, especially at larger companies, you can forget in October what you were working on in March. But again, it can just be one sentence, you know, I worked on this, worked on that. So then when you're filling out your end of year stuff, you can be more in line. And when you meet with your manager, you can kind of have a better overview because they might already have it and say like, hey, this one went well, this one went bad. And you can talk back and be like, hey, in March, I struggled on this aspect, but, you know, by September, I had kind of mastered it and I was leading these initiatives that involve this type of technology. Stuff like that, I think, can be really good and help you going forward too.
Very good advice. Paul, what do you think about the industry today? Where is the industry today, the technology industry? And do you think there are structural changes going on, like AI, capital allocation, risk appetite from investors? What are your thoughts on the industry at large?
Yeah, so like AI, super interesting area, obviously. And then I don't think I have it here. Yeah. like as a joke, there it is. As a joke, last year, oh yeah, sorry, we're on camera. As a joke, last year, like in 2 hours, I was able to like print a pretend poem book up on Amazon using Midjourney and ChatGPT. So definitely love the AI aspect as if that was more of the comedy, taking a joke about my friend. But on a serious note, on AI, I do think it's going like it's obviously going to be transformational, kind of similar to either how the actual home computer came in and kind of revolutionized computers. I'm trying to be positive on it, because I think there's a lot of kind of like fear of, hey, it's going to reduce jobs and all that sort of stuff. I think if we can leverage it in a really good way, in the fact that, it can be job creating versus job reductions. If you think of like when the mobile phone came out and there was the app store, that opened a whole new industry of revenue and stuff like that. So I think based on what I'm seeing at the moment, you see a lot of folks that are leveraging ChatGPT to kind of be their LLM on the back end to power a lot of their tools and stuff like that. I do think though it will have a big impact on the development space. It was something that like I know at SAS, we've been talking about AI for years and years and years. I do think it's going to probably it can, I think, I'm not the first person I've read this, is that it's going to level the playing field of, before you had to hire 15, 20 developers to try and even build anything or compete. Whereas now you can probably have a reduced force, not now, but in the future, and you would have those AI kind of workers, basically, you would have someone who's overseeing like 2 or 3 AI bots. One's maybe doing QA parts or automating some of the front end and automating some of that. I think that's definitely a fear, I suppose, basically, of, from the technology side. But overall, I'm like really excited to see where it goes, because I think it can take care, because again, there's a bunch of stuff out there at the moment, like Copilot. A lot of developers will use Copilot for when they're developing and stuff like that to help them improve code, or ChatGPT folks, I think we're using a lot of it for like unit testing or testing certain methods and stuff like that. So I think it can improve productivity. If we're kind of looking at the positives, it can definitely be used to help a lot of productivity. The danger would be obviously if and again, it's more VCs, if the capital folks think that, hey, you don't need to make this technology spend now because you can just use AI to do it, if that makes sense. So that's the other part that I haven't seen yet, but I'm sure that's the fear that's coming along. But then on a smaller level, when you kind of think back to like the late 90s, where there was companies that were building like websites for businesses and stuff like that, which I know still exists, but in scale and en masse. And then like Squarespace and Wix came out, and it enabled folks to do it themselves. I think that's, the next stage of AI, but there's still always going to be folks that aren't going to leverage AI. So I don't think it's going to like cripple technology developers at the moment, but in more than anything, it's going to empower non-developers to be able to do more interesting projects, probably. So it can probably lead to a bigger creativity and things like that. And the other one you mentioned, VCs and capital allocation. It's interesting, because one of my friends is a VC. We were talking about this recently, and I think looking at the reports, like, yeah, VC money has gone, the deployment has been reduced over other years, but then as it was explained to me, is it's always cyclical, right? Like, there's big rushes, not like when you look at after the 2018 or 2008 financial crisis, that's when a bunch of the big companies all actually got created and stuff like that. So from the VC folks I was talking to, they're not as worried, because they think like harder times lead to bigger creativity and stuff like that. And, it can help them be more precise in their funding as well, versus, the scattershot of, hey, there's all these companies, and it can actually, you can kind of identify the winning horses a little bit better and stuff like that. So it's definitely interesting times on the technology front.
Very nice. Question on excitement and motivation, right? It's Sunday or Monday morning is coming. What gets you excited? What when you think about the week, what gets you moving and excited?
Yeah, like I think my job, and we kind of touched on the CTO role, my job anyway at the moment still is to find the exciting projects for my team. So, we've got a lot of cool things upcoming in at Bosscat. For us, we've been in the slog of about a year and a half of like this restack, which is coming towards the completion. And that can be a challenge, definitely, of keeping, folks motivated and excited, because, you're basically rebuilding the foundationals so that we can kind of go to another level, if that makes sense. But for me, what gets me excited is the future of the expansion of the platform, basically, is what we're going to be building upcoming here in the next quarter and beyond is the stuff that's really going to differentiate BossCat, and the stuff that we've wanted to do for a long time, but we were a little bit hindered with just the fact that, like any hyper growth company, there's some maintenance that you need to do on your own tech stack. There's some tech stack that needs to be changed and modernized and stuff like that, which is always the case. But for us, we're getting into the really, really cool initiatives like around data and product and stuff like that. So for me, what gets me motivated, outside of those, is making sure that my team can continue to grow and actually feel like that's what I think is the biggest role of a leader, is to make sure your team want to come back the next day, if that makes sense. So that was a big one from Jim Goodnight at SaaS, where he said his entire role was to make sure folks drove back in the gates the next day. So I take that thing as well as what gets me excited is, okay, these are the initiatives in flight. This is where we're going. This is what's going to be upcoming. How are the team developing? Who looks like they're ready to take the next step, and things like that. So that's kind of what gets me excited for the weeks, basically, as they come up.
You keep giving me so many good phrases that I want to use. So I'm going to ask for permission to use all of them, right? Discipline equals freedom. The one jumping off a cliff and building the plane when you are, and then this one about the team wanting to come back the next day. I love all of them, so I appreciate it.
I robbed them all, so take them away.
It's a good thing. It's a good usage. Last question, Paul. What do you do when you are not working?
Yeah, so I am a software developer, so I am a computer nerd. So I love to game. I'm a bit too old these days to play sports, because it used to be sports. But yeah, game, socialize, and keep fit and stuff like that. That's kind of what I do outside of work. I used to have the best work-life balance, when I was doing the startup. So that's what I will say when folks are doing it. Definitely do your research. I was your stereotypical, again, 24/7. I have consciously in the last year and a half kind of stepped away from that a bit. So, but then in lieu of that, I've fallen more into my computer games. So probably bad as well. So yeah, outside of work, basically it's socialize, spend time with family, friends, try and stay healthy, because again, being a developer, it's sedentary, so it's not the healthiest of lifestyles. So try to stay fit, and then play computer games and stuff. And I should say, I do love to read. So that's my biggest advice to junior developers, or anyone who wants to start a startup, is always, hey, no one knows what they're doing when they start out, right? No one did know what they're doing. But there's a ton of information out there. Anything you're doing, no matter what your company, 90% of it has already been done, of hey, we need to find the right person. Who do we hire first? HR or sales? Who do we hire first? A marketing person, or do we get another operations person? There's so much stuff out there. So I have a mix of obviously a lot of fiction, but then business books or startup books as well. So that's one I would recommend to folks too. If you're interested, there's a bunch of them out there that are really cool. Some of the ones that everyone knows, like the Lean Startup, 0 to 1, Founders at Work. Then there's also the Upstarts, which I love, which is the one that follows Uber and Airbnb. I think that's super cool. Super Pumped on Uber as well is a really good one. And then the leadership ones, which, especially if you're going to be leading a team, so this can be, you don't need to necessarily have to do a startup, but I do think that Endurance is a really, really good book. And then there's Angela Duckworth's book, as I mentioned, the Grit one. I think that's a really cool one too, because it kind of helps you. It helps when you're looking at your team and analyzing them and stuff like that. There's a lot of learnings in there that you can kind of see, and stuff to be conscious of too, to help your team, hey, this is where they need encouragement. This is where they need that. That's something I definitely spend a bunch of time doing, is the reading.
Very valuable advice packed in so little time. For anyone listening, you have to go back, listen to the last minute again, make a list of those books. Great recommendations coming from a great leader. Paul, this has been amazing. I appreciate it. I appreciate you. And hopefully we can do this sometime again.
Cheers. Thanks very much, Matteo. Thank you. It was really a lot of fun.